Hello everyone. For now, please simply listen. Do not hurry to agree or disagree. Just observe what this truth reveals within you. We give meaning and importance to these temporary vessels we inhabit, believing they are all so different from one another, but it is the mind itself that creates mental phenomena and form. And why does the mind create mental phenomena and form in the first place? This teaching is subtle, so listen carefully and let it gradually deepen your wisdom. First, I want to point out something important for all of us to understand. We give meaning to this human existence and become deeply attached to the idea that we truly exist as separate selves. But when we look more deeply, we begin to see that the identity we cling to is only a condition created by the mind itself. What we truly are is mind, the life essence without form. In its purity, there are no mental phenomena and no form, no movement, no condition arising at all. Nothing is born and nothing dies. It is a pure and timeless nature, the original source from which all conditioned things arise. What the mind lacks is only understanding. To put it simply, what we lack is only understanding. In its original state, the mind is a clear and empty nature without accumulated knowledge. It cannot know anything by itself. In order to learn and experience, it creates mental phenomena and form. The creation of mental phenomena begins as movement, as mental activity. This pure essence creates conditions, the movement of perception, the movement of thought, the movement of mental formation. These movements are like a mist covering the pure nature itself, or we could say they are like bubbles surrounding an empty and formless essence. This is the beginning, and even here there is still no person, no man, no woman, no name, no surname, no father, no mother. None of these are the true self we have believed them to be. When the mind lacks understanding, it creates these conditions to cover itself so that it can take shape. This is what we may call the subtle body, the arising of perception, the arising of mental movement and thought formation. It fabricates sound, mental images, emotions such as happiness, suffering, calmness and neutrality, and it also fabricates what we call memory. All of these are movements arising within the mind itself. Try to picture it clearly. This pure and empty nature, which originally had no form at all, creates a kind of mist to cover itself, like a bubble surrounding empty space. Once covered, it appears to have form. This is what we call the subtle body, and once this bubble-like form appears, whenever something makes contact with it, perception arises and movement arises as well. This is what is called mental formation, conditioned mental activity. It manifests as sound, images, emotions, memory, and perception itself. All of these are like bubbles covering the pure essence beneath. These movements continue to fabricate and expand, generating forces of attraction and endless forms of conditioning. I call this the creation of possibilities. The mind creates these conditions so they can move and unfold in countless ways, depending on whatever causes and conditions come into contact with them. When there is this kind of contact, this kind of mental movement arises, this kind of attraction arises, a current of attachment begins to flow outward, connecting and entangling with other minds through causes and conditioning. It extends outward to cling to form, to the body, and then takes that form to be me. And yet, What we cling to as a self is only a temporary condition arising for a brief moment. Right now, there are only conditions arising. What we call sound is simply a condition communicating itself. What we call seeing is a condition. What we call thinking is a condition. What we call emotion, memory, and perception are all merely conditions unfolding on their own. There are only these movements functioning. No being, no person, no self. Only conditions arising and passing. But because we do not understand these conditions, we create them, create these instruments of experience, and then become attached to them. We cling to the conditions and cling to the instruments themselves. When this original essence creates these movements to cover and express itself, countless possibilities begin to unfold. Attachment arises, entanglement arises, identification arises, form and identity begin taking shape according to causes and conditions. And when this body eventually breaks apart, the force of conditioning continues, giving rise to new forms and new identifications. The mind then enters and clings to those forms as though they were a self. Yet the mind is not truly an animal, not truly a person, and not truly any form at all. The mind is simply a formless essence, creating movements and conditions, unfolding according to causes and conditions, giving rise to nama and rupa, mental phenomena and form. This is what I call the creation of possibilities. If you have studied electronics or the way a CPU processes information, you will see something similar. It receives only currents of 0 and 1, yet from those simple signals arise letters, numbers, calculations, analysis, sound, images, and entire systems of communication. Everything displayed on a phone screen comes from patterns of 0 and 1 transformed into countless possibilities. The mind functions in much the same way. The mind is a pure and transparent essence without form. It cannot truly know itself, nor can it create wisdom within itself directly, so it begins to create nama, mental phenomena, perception, and movements of thought. These conditions continue to unfold and fabricate themselves in countless ways according to causes and conditions. Later, they begin forming rupa, form, and structure. This is what I call the creation of possibilities, the endless movement of mental formation arising for the sake of learning. From this, countless varieties of nama and rupa emerge, giving rise to different forms of life and endless kinds of experience. All of this is created so the mind can learn through the many expressions it has brought into being, learning from every angle and every condition, until eventually the evolution of learning reaches a point where it begins turning back to know itself. Today, human consciousness has evolved to the point where it can begin reversing its outward movement and turn inward to observe itself. Now we begin learning about ourselves, learning about the original source, learning how the mind creates possibilities, how it begins creating cycles of attachment, how it creates nama and rupa, and how these patterns continue unfolding over time until they become knots that bind minds together through causes and conditioning, continuing generation after generation until this very day. We become bound to one another, influencing and conditioning one another, endlessly circling within this cycle. All of this is simply mental phenomena and form fabricating, conditioning, and clinging to one another. But the mind itself, the original essence, is not truly any of these things. The mind seeks only awakening, the direct knowing of what it truly is, and the direct knowing of what all things truly are. So the mind continues using mental phenomena and form as instruments of learning, endlessly fabricating and unfolding through infinite possibilities. It extends outward in every direction, creating countless forms and conditions. All form arises from mental phenomena, from the energetic movements emerging from the mind itself. Perception, thought, emotion, memory, and all the movements of mental activity. These are what we call mental phenomena, and these conditions themselves are created by the mind, the original source. The mind creates these movements and these temporary instruments for the sake of learning. In essence, the mind creates mental phenomena and form as temporary tools for learning. Once true understanding arises, they are released immediately. This body is only a temporary vessel. This voice is only a temporary instrument. Mental images, emotions, perception, and memory are all temporary tools. Yet we cling to these temporary things for an entire lifetime because we have not yet turned inward to truly know the mind. The sages turned inward and awakened to the mind directly. They realize that what they truly are is this pure and transparent essence, not mental phenomena and form. The sages awakened and became free from the cycle of mental phenomena and form. They no longer create mental phenomena and form and no longer cling to them, but we still cling to them constantly. We cling to the idea that we are human beings, that we are the ones speaking, the ones knowing, the ones thinking, the ones feeling emotion. We continue identifying with all of it. Yet the sages taught that none of these things are truly us or truly ours. Form, the body, and the material world is simply form. It is not us. It is not ours. It has no permanent self within it. As for mental phenomena, perception, thought, imagination, emotion, memory, and all the movements we temporarily rely upon, even this voice being used right now is only a temporary condition used for communication. It exists only to reveal that none of these things possess a true self. So do not cling to them. They are conditioned movements, endlessly circling within the cycle of suffering, endlessly repeating the same patterns, the same thoughts, the same emotions, the same memories, the same reactions, moving again and again within the same conditioned system. None of it is truly us or ours. When we no longer cling to mental phenomena and form, awakening to the mind, to the pure essence itself, naturally becomes possible because what we truly are has always been the mind itself. But instead we become absorbed in mental phenomena and form, and so we mistakenly believe that we are human beings, that we are this voice, these emotions, these perceptions, these memories. We practice only to become lost in peaceful states, attached to subtle dimensions of feeling and inner experience. We remain attached to the subtle body, the very conditions we ourselves have created. We created these conditions. We created this world of experience as a temporary instrument meant only for learning and eventually letting go. Yet we cling to it so deeply that we forget our true nature as the pure essence itself. That is why the sages taught us to let go of everything completely. Even this voice speaking right now is not us. Even this perception happening right now is not us. Even awakening itself is not us. Let go of everything. Nothing at all is truly us or ours. O mind, do not cling to mental phenomena and form. The mind waits patiently to learn through the mental phenomena and form it has created until one day that learning reflects back and begins to recognize itself. It is like sending out a wave of energy. When that wave touches something and reflects back, it begins to recognize both what has been perceived and the nature of the one perceiving. The mental phenomena and form created by the mind are simply instruments for learning. Temporary movements sent outward in order to experience and understand. They have no true importance in themselves. What the mind truly seeks is not mental phenomena and form, but awakening itself. The mind seeks only understanding, the wisdom of direct knowing, what we may call true knowledge. A mind lost in ignorance gradually transforms into a mind of wisdom. It is a transformation from a state without true understanding into a state of direct knowing and clear comprehension of reality as it truly is. Why do we go to school? Deep down, we do not truly want to spend our lives studying, but we know we must learn. And after studying for a long time, a feeling naturally appears. When will this finally end? When will I graduate? Learning may be valuable, but eventually we long for completion. The mind is no different. It creates mental phenomena and form in order to learn through every possible experience. What the mind truly seeks is wisdom, not mental phenomena and form themselves. I use this voice to communicate with you, but I do not want you to cling to this voice. I do not need this body, and I do not need this voice. They are only temporary instruments being used to point out that nothing truly possesses a separate self. We go to school in order to one day stop studying. Once we graduate, we no longer wish to continue endlessly learning in the same way. The mind is no different. The mind in its original state lacks true understanding, and so it seeks wisdom, the direct realization that all the things it has relied upon for learning never possessed a true self to begin with. When it finally sees that nothing truly has a separate self, the process of seeking comes to an end. The mind realizes that it is the very essence that created all these experiences, and that everything it has relied upon for so long was never truly a self at all. Once this realization becomes complete, the journey of learning has come to an end. The mind no longer depends on mental phenomena and form, no longer creates mental phenomena and form in order to continue learning. Its task is complete. We, as mind itself, created mental phenomena and form and then became lost in them, believing we were human beings. Because of this, we suffered deeply and searched endlessly for a way beyond suffering. Eventually, we begin to realize that suffering itself has no true self within it. This body is not truly our body. Thoughts, mental images, emotions, perception, and memory are not truly us. Nothing at all can truly be called self. And when this is clearly seen, the mind naturally stops depending on these temporary conditions. Mental phenomena and form are then seen as merely what they are. Speaking is merely speaking. Laughter is merely laughter. Even this knowing is merely knowing. The movements constantly arising within experience lose all importance. This body loses its importance. This voice loses its importance. Mental images lose their importance. Memories lose their importance. Pleasure loses its importance. Suffering loses its importance. Why? Because the mind no longer foolishly clings to any condition, whether positive or negative. This is the middle way, the only path to liberation. It is the path of not clinging to conditioned experience, neither to the positive nor the negative, neither to pleasure nor suffering, neither to calmness nor restlessness. Cling to nothing at all, because all of these things are merely conditioned movements. They arise from the original source. They arise from us. We ourselves created them and then became lost in our own creations. We think and then suffer because of our own thinking. Even this perception happening right now is simply perceiving by itself, yet we cling to it as though we are the ones perceiving. Try commanding the ears not to hear sound. Hearing still happens on its own. Try commanding the mind not to understand. Understanding still arises on its own. So where exactly is the self within all this? Bring suffering to its rightful end. To do this rightly means to understand it correctly. The end of suffering is freedom from suffering itself, and freedom comes through directly seeing where suffering truly arises from. All suffering arises from the original source itself, and the end of suffering is found within that very source. When understanding reaches its furthest point, we begin to realize that the highest knowledge is the realization that, at its essence, there was never anything there to become. All forms of knowing arise from a nature that is fundamentally empty of identity. We then return to the simplicity of natural being and clearly see that the self we once clung to so firmly never truly existed in the way we imagined. What is suffering? The sages taught us to observe suffering, to understand suffering, because through understanding it completely, we discover what lies beyond it. Anything that constantly moves, changes, appears, disappears, and transforms is suffering. Mental phenomena are conditioned movements. Form is also conditioned, endlessly arising and dissolving, constantly changing. Mental phenomena and form are themselves suffering. Yet there is a nature that is not bound to mental phenomena and form. That is the original source. Mental phenomena and form arise from that original source itself. This voice speaking right now is suffering. Pleasant emotion is suffering. Painful emotion is suffering. Calmness is suffering. Restlessness is suffering. Thoughts and mental fabrications are suffering. All stories and all worlds are suffering. If we do not clearly recognize these things as suffering, we can never truly become free from the cycle of suffering. No matter how skilled we become at walking meditation or sitting meditation, we are still playing within the field of suffering itself. From the moment we wake until the moment we sleep, we remain surrounded by suffering continuously. Mental phenomena and form are the truth of suffering. They are all conditioned states, appearances, movements, and fabrications that arise only to dissolve again. This body arises only to pass away. Thoughts arise only to pass away. Mental images arise only to pass away. Emotions arise only to pass away. Memories arise only to pass away. Even perception itself arises only to pass away. This is suffering. To bring suffering to an end means to look directly into suffering until it is clearly seen that none of these conditions possess a true self. Mental phenomena and form have no self within them. They are not us, and they are not ours. They arise from the original source itself. And when this is fully understood, then it is no longer us who are speaking, and no longer us who are perceiving. When nothing is taken to be self, the mind naturally moves beyond suffering, and in moving beyond suffering, it becomes free. Thoughts, or the inner voice, are merely sounds arising within the mind. Mental images are merely mental images. Emotions are merely emotions. Even calmness is simply another condition arising within experience. Memory, perception, and all forms of knowing are simply natural movements functioning according to their own nature. None of them are truly us or ours. When this is clearly seen, the mind naturally moves beyond suffering. It becomes free from suffering, and a profound awakening begins to arise. Tears may come, a sudden realization may appear, a direct awakening to the pure essence itself, so clear and profoundly pure. This is the moment of truly realizing that mental phenomena and form are not the self. This is what it means to bring suffering to its rightful end, to see directly that all suffering is empty of self, and that mental phenomena and form have never possessed a true identity at all. Even awakening itself possesses no self. The pure essence realizes that it is no longer bound to mental phenomena and form. It moves beyond them completely, beyond form, beyond mental phenomena, no longer entangled with either. Even while speaking, there is no attachment to speaking. Form is no longer seen as self. Mental phenomena are no longer seen as self. Everything simply exists according to its own nature. Nothing is us and nothing belongs to us. This is the true ending of suffering, the direct realization of non-self. That is why the sages reduced all teachings to a single principle, non-self. Nothing whatsoever is truly us or ours. Through wisdom they turned inward and awakened within themselves. They observed the movements that know by themselves, think by themselves, imagine by themselves, and feel emotions by themselves. Everything functions naturally on its own. The heart beats by itself. The body functions by itself. And eventually it falls apart by itself. Thoughts think by themselves. Mental images arise by themselves. Emotions condition themselves. Perception functions by itself. Memory remembers by itself. All of it is simply conditioned nature functioning on its own, with no owner anywhere within it. When there is no owner within experience, the mind naturally moves beyond all suffering, beyond mental phenomena and form, no longer entangled with them. Live with suffering, but do not cling to suffering, because suffering itself possesses no true self. Use the voice as a tool for communication, but do not cling to the idea that there is someone speaking. Use all things as temporary instruments, but do not mistake them for a self. When it is clearly seen that nothing whatsoever is truly us or ours, and that there is only the movement of natural processes functioning by themselves, the mind naturally rises beyond all conditioned fabrication, beyond mental phenomena and form, and becomes free from suffering. We are deeply accustomed to looking outward, constantly giving meaning and importance to external things. A mind that does not yet understand will continuously create conditioned movements and project itself outward into the world. Because this essence possesses the tendency to learn, it endlessly creates possibilities, continuously extending itself outward through experience. And through this long habit of looking outward, the mind becomes absorbed in external appearances and forgets to turn inward to know itself directly. The transformation of this essential nature is the transformation of the mind itself. The mind is the original source, moving from unknowing toward wisdom and direct understanding. Yet it cannot learn by itself alone, so it creates mental phenomena and form as instruments for learning. Sound is one form of transformation. Mental images are another form of transformation. Emotions are transformation. Memory and all forms of perception are conditioned movements continuously changing according to causes and conditions, giving rise to countless forms and appearances throughout experience. Let me give you a simple comparison so this becomes easier to understand. Imagine an ordinary piece of iron. By itself, it has no magnetic force. It is simply ordinary iron. But when it is influenced by a magnetic field, something begins to change within it. A magnetic force arises and the iron becomes magnetized. This is a transformation of its nature. Once magnetized, it begins generating an attractive force of its own, immediately pulling other pieces of iron toward itself. The mind functions in much the same way. It projects a force of attachment outward, clinging to people, objects, emotions, memories, the body, and eventually clinging to the idea of me. Because the mind does not yet understand reality as it truly is, it clings to everything. That attractive force is what we call mental phenomena, and the things being clung to are what we call form. But how does a magnet release the iron attached to it? No one can simply pull it free by force. The magnet itself must change. Once its inner condition transforms and the magnetic force disappears, the attachment naturally falls away on its own. The mind is exactly the same. When true understanding arises, when it is clearly seen that mental phenomena and form are not the self, attachment naturally dissolves. We begin to see directly that this body was born only to fall apart. Thoughts arise by themselves, emotions arise by themselves, memories arise by themselves, perception arises by itself. Everything arises and dissolves according to its own nature. None of it is truly us. It is all simply functioning on its own. When the mind clearly sees reality in this way, the very nature of the mind begins to transform from a state of ignorance into a state of wisdom and direct understanding. In that very moment, attachment begins to dissolve. The force that once clung to mental phenomena and form fades away naturally, and the mind no longer becomes entangled with them. Why? Because the nature of the mind itself has changed through wisdom. It no longer needs to create mental phenomena and form in the same way as before. And once the mind no longer clings to mental phenomena and form, whatever we choose to call that state no longer matters. It is simply the natural state of a mind that has awakened into wisdom. Enough of clinging. The stronger the attachment, the deeper the suffering. That is why the sages taught us not to cling, because nothing whatsoever is truly us or ours. This itself is the transformation of the mind through wisdom. Whenever we become lost in thought, we may wonder, why can't thinking simply stop, even when I know I am lost in it? That is because the mind still does not fully understand reality as it truly is. If the mind truly understood, it would no longer keep fueling further mental fabrication. It is like helping someone climb over a wall. As long as people continue pushing and supporting them upward, they keep climbing. But the moment the support stops, everything naturally comes to an end. The mind works in the same way. When it lacks understanding, it continuously generates momentum, continuously pushing outward, creating waves of mental activity, projecting itself outward into the world again and again. A mind that does not yet understand reality is constantly drawn outward. It gives meaning and importance to external things, tying itself to stories, people, opinions, and endless conditions outside itself. It likes one person and dislikes another. It judges, compares, divides, and takes sides. All of this is the habitual tendency of an unawakened mind. It continuously projects its energy outward, assigning meaning to everything it encounters because its nature still longs to learn and experience. And so it endlessly creates possibilities for itself to expand outward through experience, much like a star releasing energy outward without end. The mind functions in the same way. It projects itself outward, creating mental phenomena and form, creating attachment, and continuously constructing entire worlds of mental fabrication. That is why we become accustomed to looking outward. We cling to people, animals, objects, emotions, thoughts, ideas of right and wrong, good and bad. We cling to the belief that certain people belong to us, or that certain things define us. All of this is the field of attachment generated by a mind that has not yet transformed through wisdom. As long as that transformation has not taken place, the mind will continue clinging endlessly, just as a magnet continues attracting iron for as long as its magnetic field remains active. But the moment the mind begins to see reality directly, everything starts to change. It sees that thoughts think by themselves, emotions condition themselves, memories remember by themselves, perception functions by itself, the body works by itself, and the heart beats by itself. Everything is simply natural processes functioning according to their own conditions. There is no owner anywhere within them, and when this is clearly seen, the mind naturally begins releasing its attachment because it finally recognizes that everything it once clung to was only a temporary condition, only an instrument for learning, only a fabrication arising and passing away according to causes and conditions. When the mind sees reality in this direct way, it begins to realize the truth of non-self. It sees that nothing whatsoever is truly me or mine. Even this voice speaking right now is not the self. Even this ongoing perception is not the self. Even awakening itself is not the self. Everything is simply nature functioning according to its own laws. And when the mind sees this clearly, attachment immediately begins to loosen. The force that once clung to mental phenomena and form gradually weakens and eventually dissolves completely. This is why true practice is not about creating another identity. It is not about becoming a practitioner, nor about creating peaceful states to cling to. True practice is simply seeing reality as it is, seeing that all mental phenomena and form are empty of self. Everything is merely a conditioned movement, arising according to causes and conditions and dissolving according to causes and conditions. When the mind fully accepts this truth, it begins to see clearly that the sense of self it has clung to for so long never truly existed in the way it once believed. Everything is simply a condition, a temporary instrument the mind created and relied upon for learning. And once learning reaches its completion, the mind naturally stops creating, stops clinging, and stops remaining entangled within the cycle of mental phenomena and form. This is why the sages taught us to turn inward and observe the mind itself, to observe the conditions functioning within experience right now. Not in order to cling to those conditions, but in order to see directly that they possess no true self. And when this is seen clearly, the mind naturally begins releasing its attachments on its own. Once attachment disappears, there is no longer anyone suffering, no one carrying burdens, no one endlessly wandering within cycles of becoming. What remains is only the pure nature itself, existing naturally according to its own timeless reality. If these teachings on awakening, mind observation, and transcending suffering through wisdom resonate with you, you're welcome to share your reflections in the comments. And if this has been helpful, you may support the channel by liking, sharing, or subscribing. Thank you for listening. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.